In this video, I want to talk a little bit about some of the struggles going on within an introvert dealing with the outer world, as well as within an extrovert, without an extrovert, dealing within the inner world, and how you can understand yourself a bit better through understanding how it affects somebody else. What's up, legend? It's Sherman here from Geek Psychology, helping you find your true character and level it up so you can play life better. I was talking to a client today, and we were talking about introversion and extroversion, and I was kind of going through the spiel to explain it. And within that, we got onto a pretty nice conversation, and I want to tap into that as much as I can within this video, because I feel that it'll be helpful for you to understand yourself and other people better, which is what we're about here at Geek Psychology. And let's get right into it. So I went through the kind of normal explanation of introversion and extroversion based on Personality Hacker's way of explaining it. And in order to kind of simply quickly go through that, I'll do it here. We were talking about which world is the real world to you, the inner world or the outer world, and where do you put the most importance in life and in interactions and all this other stuff. And so for an introvert, it's piecing together their feelings, their thoughts, their experiences, their patterns, predictions, imagination, like how these things are working within yourself is the key point. It's the subjective understanding. I call it defensive in terms of video games, RPG stuff. Offensive is the extrovert, and defensive is the introvert. You know, and it's more calculated approach to things. Not necessarily calculated in terms of like strategy, but it's like trying to understand it before interacting with it, right? You're taking slower steps. You're not throwing yourself in there as an extrovert might, as an offensive character would, right? It's I'm going to understand this thing before I interact with it, so that I can interact with it properly. And for an extrovert, it's more of I'm going to interact with the thing. I'm going to take offensive steps, proactive steps to deal with it, to engage with it, to get my hands on it, to experience it, to understand the patterns of it more, to whatever it is, to shape it. And through that, I'm going to learn more about it. Right? So it's more of an engage first, hands-on first, perhaps, especially for like extroverted sensors, right? Hands-on first, engage with it, shake it up, zoom in, play around with it, understand the thing as quickly as you can so that you can have a quicker understanding of it, right? And within this, though, we because we spend so much time in one of these two stances, offensive or defensive, introverted, extroverted or introverted, then we tend to have weaker spots within the other one, right? This is natural balance, right? It's the cost of specialization. You do one thing a lot, that means you're not doing all this other stuff, which means you're going to struggle with it. Just because you haven't built the skills around it doesn't mean it's good or bad or anything like that. It's just you haven't built the skills around it to deal with it in the same way that you would in your normal stance. And so for introverts, when we do the offensive stuff, when we go out there and take these actions or go peopling or whatever it is, we go travel around and we're kind of flooded with this massive amount of new feedback, new information. It's a bit overwhelming. It's good. It's good to do. It's incredibly important to do. And yet when we do it, it feels like somebody just poured a whole bunch of a box of puzzle pieces all over, just shook it all over the place. And now we're looking at it like, well, what is this? What is this thing? What is this image? What is this supposed to be? And now I got to put it back together. I got to put it together and understand it. And it's like I'm going to try to figure it out first before I actually take the actions. And that can be tiring. That can be exhausting because you're like, I got a lot of work to do now, right? To understand my subjective reality more. And so the dragons, the demons for an introvert are likely in the outer world. They're the things that you have to go do, the experiences that you have to have, the this impact in the outer world. Like that is where the scary stuff is. Internally, and I was talking to another INFP, but internally, like the parts of myself that I don't understand, I'm not necessarily afraid of them. I'm not necessarily in the same way that I would be uncomfortable starting new conversations or something like that, or just being more spontaneous and doing things on the fly. I'm not really that, I don't have that same interaction within myself, right? Like, oh, this is an important, interesting aspect of myself that's now come up that I gotta understand. And that's kind of exciting for me, right? And this is my blend of it, being an INFP, I understand that. And for the extroverts though, it's the opposite, right? It's the outer world is where the reality is. The more engagement, the better. The more you can understand the world through being actually in touch with it, being objectively in touch with it, the better, right? The more you're going to understand that important aspect of reality. The more actions you're taking, the more exciting it is, and the more you are in your element. And stopping and going inward is where the demons are, where the dragons are, where the treasure is as well. Just like for introverts, the treasure is in that outer world, is learning how to impact people and influence people and create and obtain your goals and those kind of things, right? But it's scary. It can be hard. And the only real way that I can understand that is intellectually, as well as using it as kind of a parallel to what is going on within myself. You know, when I'm like, all the scary stuff is outside of myself, well, I can understand how an extrovert who doesn't have as much, time spent subjectively mulling over stuff might be afraid of what they could find, what they could uncover inside. And, we all have this aspect within us and without us, right? It's something that we deal with. And the conversation kind of turned to another aspect of, despite that stuff that I just said, for an introvert to take an action in the outer world means that I got to put this stuff, whatever I'm doing inside, whatever I'm thinking, feeling, processing, whatever it is, that stuff is, if I interact with somebody, I put it out there into the wild, right? And now that is a reflection of me because I've put it out there. I chose to put that out there. And we were talking a little bit about vanity. There is a kind of a vanity aspect to it. I can see that, right? Putting this thing out there is something that other people are going to see and view, interact with, and that is going to be how they understand who I am. And I don't necessarily want to do that. That's exhausting to me, right? Because I have to make sure that this is the exact thing that I want to put out there, or as close to it as possible, which is a difficult thing. You can never get it exactly right, and that's life. There is no perfect, And in doing that, in putting yourself into new contexts and putting yourself out there and, saying this is the version of me that I have to display here, you put it out there in the wild, and other people interact with it, you learn about yourself, right? You learn that, oh, this is, because I'm in this context and I took this action, that means that I am now somebody who can take that action. I've shown myself this aspect of myself, and it might not be a good one. It might be you had a moral conflict and you chose the path that you hoped you wouldn't. And when doing that, it shines a light on yourself and says, this is something that I am capable of doing. And now I got to explore that. Now I got to piece that together. And that can be, it can be pretty heavy. It can be a big thing to deal with. And so I'm trying to understand the extrovert's perspective on that. You know, you get all these experiences, right? You do these things, you interact, you know, and I know some people are like an ENTJ, for example. You might not do a lot of peopling because people get in the way of you doing the stuff that you got to do, right? I understand that. You know, it's not all just people, but people are a quick way of getting a lot of feedback and a lot of information, which is why you would imagine interacting with people more is more stimulating for most extroverts. Does that make sense? So when you interact with people, when you do this stuff, you put this stuff out there, and then you reflect on it internally, what happens? You sit with it, you understand it, and then you move on? Or does it leave this like little seed within you that, like it did with me when I was explaining it, like you got this little seed, like this is something that I've encapsulated now, that's within me. This little seed is now a part of who I am. Like if you're an ESJ or something like that, right? You have that captured experience, that sensory experience, right? That you now, if you reflect on it once, then it's going to be there, more present, more recallable, more impactful. And now it's an experience that you're continuously stuck with. You know, like when an extrovert's talking or something like that, sometimes it's processing out loud. As the ideas are coming out, they're connecting them or funneling them into whatever they're trying to say. Right? You say it and sometimes you're like, oh, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean to say that. And you move on, right? But for an introvert, saying that thing, I think it's got a lot more weight, is all I'm saying, because we put it out there. We express it and then we're like, oh, that's something that now I got to deal with because I put it out there, and it kind of feels a bit yucky. Is there stuff for an extrovert that when you put in an experience that you captured, a feeling that you touched on, a piece of information that you put in the right spot finally, and you're like, oh, okay, that doesn't quite feel right. Now I got to reshape my understanding of the world. Maybe you take on somebody else's perspective, right? You switch your mindset, and now that's something that you got to deal with because that's within you. And so there's a part of you that doesn't want to go inward. And those are some kind of rambly thoughts on what was going on in my brain when I was having this conversation. And I want to know what you thought about it, how you felt about it, the ideas, the connections that came up to help us all understand each other a little bit better. That's the goal, right? More understanding of yourself, more understanding of other people, so that we can impact the world, so we can make a better place for us all to live. So I hope that this video was helpful. I hope it got you thinking. And if it did, please like, share, subscribe, do all the good stuff. Love you guys. Peace.